Hey everybody, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers. And I've been fortunate lately. I've been on a little bit of a kick of talking to novelists who write historical fiction, which is something I've always been wildly impressed by. Any type of historical fiction, the amount of research, the amount of work, and the amount of passion that goes into writing books that have to balance that line between historical accuracy and storytelling is always impressive to me. You know, it's, I mean, look at me. The name of the show is Making It Up. I love making things up. I eschew research to the most that I can. I'm not a big fan of research. I think it's important. I think you have to do it to serve your story, but I tend to write novels that don't necessarily require a lot of research. So I always have so much respect and admiration for those who just kind of dive so deeply into it. And today's guest is the epitome of somebody who understands how difficult it is to do research and to balance that with a good story all at the same time and not to overshow your research. So today I talked to Aimie Runyan. So Aimie, you probably have heard of her. She has written several historical novels. Her bio says she writes to celebrate history's unsung heroines. So she's been honored as a Historical Novel Society Editor's Choice Selection, a 3-time finalist for the Colorado Book Awards, and as a nominee for the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writer of the Year. So she's written such books with, thousands and thousands and thousands of reviews. The School for German Brides, Daughters of the Night Sky, and her upcoming release coming out this August is A Bakery in Paris. So she's just up the road from me, more or less, in Estes Park, Colorado. So about 40 minutes away or so from where I live. So it was good to kind of share notes on Colorado. But her journey is really interesting because she had a passion for reading first and then writing, as early as the 3rd grade, and even started to write a novel in high school. I think she said she got like 60 to 80 pages into it. But when you think about it, that's, what high schoolers writing 60 to 80 pages on their own of a novel. So, the passion to write was always there. And then, she started something else and then put it away for, I think she said 10 years while, quote unquote, life got in the way. But as we all know, I think she's a person who, like, the writing is in her. It's going to come out one way or another. And, she had to go through those 10 years of life experiences to be able to produce the book that she ended up producing, which ended up becoming an overnight success. So she's been on a great trajectory with a few different publishers over the years. And, she's got a lot of stuff in the works. And she's got a lot of stuff out, and she just is living the life of a full-time writer. So I think you're going to like this one. Lots of good advice in here. This is my conversation with Aimie Runyan.
How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm just great.
How is that? Where are you in Colorado? Remind me.
Estes Park.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm just down the road. I'm just outside of Boulder.
Yeah, we used to be basically neighbors. I moved up here in 2021, but I was in Frederick.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right next door.
Kind of the no man's land between Frederick and Erie, actually, the little subdivision there.
Oh.
Now in Estes, which is wonderful.
What prompted that move? Because Estes is a beautiful place, but obviously smaller and a little bit more remote.
Yeah, well, my husband, I was dating a lovely young man. And his parents live up here in Estes. This is where they chose to retire. And he is a professor at the University of Arizona and teaches largely online. So he's able to split his time between Arizona and Estes Park. So when we decided to get married, we decided to buy real estate up here in Estes Park because I'm mobile. This is my, writing books is my full-time gig. And he teaches online. And so we're able to live wherever we want. And the schools are good for the kids. So
awesome.
It works out.
And so for viewers and listeners out there, Estes Park is a a little mountain town nestled a little bit away from Boulder, Colorado, and famously known as the location of where Stephen King was influenced for The Shining in the Stanley Hotel up there. And I prior to the pandemic, I took an annual writing trip, usually alone, up to the Stanley. And the Stanley has 8 rooms that are designated haunted. And so my goal was to stay in each one of those rooms. So 2019, I think I finally hit the last room. So I've stayed in all 8 haunted rooms, and I've written some pretty creepy shit while I was up there.
Nice. I actually I've been to the Stanley. I see it every day.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But I haven't been inside the main part of the hotel, but they have a maze. Like if any of you've seen the movie The Shining, there's the horrific climax is set in a maze outside. And so they built a hedge maze, and it's still growing. But I've met during the height of the lockdown or stay-at-home orders, you could still go around the hedge maze outside and stuff like that. That's awesome. Out of doors. Yeah,
I'll have to check it out, because the last time I saw it, or one of the last times I saw it, it was still relatively new. And I love the fact that they planted that hedge maze. They're really just leaning into the whole thing, because for a little while they were leaning away from it, and then they realized, like, we get so much money from people who just want to come stay in this hotel because of Stephen King. But the hedge maze was like, when I saw it, was like up to my ankles. So it was not too hard to
size. Yeah, exactly. It's like thigh length now, but
right. Right, exactly. Yeah. And so are you originally from Colorado?
No, actually, I don't say this out loud too often. I'm from California originally.
Me too, more or less. I grew up in California.
I grew up in a small town in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, so mountains are definitely my jam. My family's still there, so I get to go back. I'll be doing an event there in August, which will be great. But yeah, family's still there, but definitely I'm kind of a small town mountain girl. As much as I love visiting Paris and all those beautiful places, I'm definitely a small town kind of girl.
Yeah, I feel you. I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles until I was 18, and then I've kind of lived a lot of different places, but I've been in Colorado for about 26, 27 years. But I agree. Like, there's nothing like kind of nestling yourself away a little bit. And now even I'm feeling like, geez, Colorado's getting a little crowded, getting a little bit big. And it makes me like want to find like something even like more remote, but I haven't pulled the trigger on that yet.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about Estes Park is that it's kind of limited. It's not going to be able to grow too much.
Right.
Of course, it's a very different place in summer, because kind of like, The Shining, it really is a summer only location because it's so hard to get to in the winter. And a lot of the locals, we've got a lot of retirees that kind of go down someplace warmer in the winter. But for those of us hardy folk who live here year round, it's really quiet in the winter. It's wonderful.
Yeah. It probably gets to the point where it's kind of annoying in the summer. You're like, oh, these damn tourists.
Yeah. You just know when to go and where. Like first thing in the morning when all the tourists are asleep, that's when you do your stuff.
Right. So, so I'm always fascinated with, right? I've spoken to probably 3 or 4, not, in the last probably 6 months, historical fiction writers. And I have so much respect, because to me, it's such a labor of love. Writing in general is a labor of love. And people ask me about research. I'm like, I hate research. I don't research unless I absolutely have to, because to me, it feels like homework. And then I talk to people who write historical fiction or even nonfiction. Your attention to detail and your commitment to the truth and to a story at the same time is amazing. It's so difficult to balance. So I want to delve in a little bit both to your curiosity and your upbringing around writing, and then also around history, because obviously those two dovetail immensely in your life. So growing up in remote mountain town in California, what was the environment? What were you doing? Did you have siblings? Was there creativity within the family was it an expectation that you were going to be a writer? Which I hope not. But
oh, no.
Most parents wouldn't do that to their kids.
No, my parents, I grew up with 2 older siblings, 2 sisters, and they're about 4 or 5 years older than I am. And they were very close in age. So I was kind of always a little bit on my own. And that lends itself, because I was also a voracious reader. I learned to read really young, and that's where I found an escape. So I discovered writing through reading, which is, I think, a pretty natural gateway. I was just a dorky little kid alone in her room reading a lot. And, my parents, my mom is an accountant for the city, or was, and my dad was a fire marshal, like fire investigator. They're very math and sciencey people. And so the fact that, my mother did love to read. And so there were books always around the house. In fact, I'll stand up. So a lot of those books, the Leatherbound Classics, are from my mom's collection that she has gifted to me over the years. So it was a reading household, but the idea of being a professional writer was something that people, my family thought was cool, but it was not something where there was any kind of help as far as knowing how to get into the business. It's not like being born into the Barrymore family and having a natural path to becoming an actor.
Right.
It was just one of those things where it was breaking into a field that the family had nothing to do with. And the great part was my family was always very supportive. If I ever wanted a book, it's, here, have some money, walk down to the 2 bookstores. We had 2 bookstores in a tiny little town, which I think is great. Yeah. One of them is still there. It's a used bookstore, and I love that place. Spent most of my misspent youth in that place. So the Bookery, Placerville, California, is a great place.
That's like the equivalent of me going to like the place that sold like import CDs when I was like 15, and just the smell and like, do they have anything new? What do they have that's new that I haven't seen? Do they have the new Smith single that's from the UK?
Yeah, exactly. And you go back into that place, and it's changed around a little bit from the time I was a kid, but I was in there, back in 2019 was probably the last time I went inside. And the smell and everything, it just brings you back.
It takes you.
Yeah. And so, I always loved books. And the first time I sat down, tried to write a story was actually in 3rd grade. And it was a school assignment. They gave us these great, somebody's grandmother had made these little handmade journals. And we were all supposed to write down a story. Yeah, because they were doing the whole drafting and what the writing process looks like they do with little kids. And the final draft was to go in this journal. And mine was leopard print. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I wrote a retelling of the myth of Atalanta. I thought it was the greatest thing. And so I dabbled in it, and I committed the cardinal sin of not finishing my stuff a lot of times. I started a novel in high school, and, looking back, it wasn't wholly embarrassing, but I should have finished it. It would have been good for me as an author. But I really, I was 33, and I sat down for the first time, and I said, I started this novel 10 years ago, and boy, howdy, it's time to finish something.
Wow.
And so I finished my first novel at 33.
That's 33 is actually when I started writing. I had zero aspirations, zero background, and that's when I started. You could write it at any age, and that's
oh, for sure.
But I want to unpack a couple of things about what you just said. First of all, the idea of writing as a kid or even as an adult, the idea of being a writer is such an opaque thing until you're actually in it, doing it, and understanding a little bit about the industry. So, a lot of teenagers will look at books and just be, okay, a book is there. I don't know where it came from, but you don't think about somebody sitting down and writing it and being like, that's what I want to do, as opposed to a 15-year-old saying, I want to play professional sports because I watched it on TV and they're my heroes. It's just it's an intangible thing. But you, as a teenager, as a high schooler, started writing a novel, and that's pretty out there. So what was it that you had a story in mind that you wanted to tell, or you just felt like challenging yourself?
It was, I've always gravitated toward historical stuff as a reader. So I wanted to write a story based on, inspired by and completely made up about my family emigrating from Ireland. And, because a huge amount of Irish ancestry going on over here. And, I just thought, because I'd watched the movie Far and Away with Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise in the 90s. And I thought it was the epitome of awesome. And, because I was young. And I loved the whole notion. And so I was going to do a series, it was going to be, the different generations going on after that first woman had emigrated. Margaret was a character, emigrated from Ireland over to the United States, and then, down the family line. And, I never actually got much past it because she was going to settle in California like my family did. They settled in California like the 1850s.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And so they were there for a long time. And I just thought that was all fascinating. And of course, now I know, West Coast historicals is really hard to sell, this, that, and the other thing. So I'm glad I didn't know any of that back then, because I probably wrote, I don't know, 60 or 80 pages, which is a lot when you're going through, high school and all, it was like extra homework. And
Right.
it was a lot of fun. It was
I just trying to figure out story structure and pacing. And
yeah, I had no idea about any of that stuff.
No,
I was
of
just
course not.
reading.
Right.
Yeah, I was just writing.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
the seed is planted, but then what did you end up studying like in college?
French. Actually, I was a French major with a speech and debate minor, communication arts minor. And I ended up, though, because I got a master's in French, and you'll notice the influence over my body of work.
Yeah,
a lot of
of
it takes place in France, or is at least tangentially related to France. Even the book about the Russian female fighter pilot, she ends up in France at the end of it.
Oh, it's got to be French. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up getting a master's degree in French, but I studied basically a historical element of it for my thesis. I wrote about the women who emigrated from France to Canada to settle the colonies. And that was the inspiration for my first book back when I was in my 20s. And I wrote it as a short story because I did take one creative writing class, and it got great, feedback, but everybody said it feels like the first chapter of a novel. Mm-hmm. And I set it in a drawer because I got busy having a career as a teacher, and I got married, had a couple of kids, and, it was a lot to try and keep that up. So it sat in a drawer. But when my daughter, my second child, started sleeping through the night, I figured I got, about 2 hours a day on my own. I'm going to do something with it. And that became Promise to the Crown, that blue book right there.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting that, because I think, as you probably know now, you can write no matter what. Like, doesn't matter everything that's going on in your life. If you apply and carve out time for it, like you would anything else that's important to you, you can do it. So it's almost like sometimes it just needs to be the right time. Like it sounds like you weren't quite ready to finish that. Like it was, something else had to happen in your life before you kind of came back to that. But clearly it's going to come out no matter what, because you've been at this since the third grade.
Yeah, exactly. And, for that book, I think I realized what the problem was. I had to be a mother to be able to write it, because it was so much about the importance of being a mother, because that was the whole point, was going over to make children. And it deals with, child loss and a lot of other really deep topics that I really had to experience becoming a parent to be able to write it. And that, it does come back in some of the other books, but especially those first two. Motherhood is such an important theme.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was a big roadblock for that book.
Interesting. And isn't that, it's so interesting to see as you write more and more books, how each book has that footprint of whatever was going on in your life at the time. You can see it right in, like I wrote it because the same thing with, I started writing when we were pregnant with our first kid, and those first few books, there were so many scenes with like little kids, and just like, there's so much more like emotional, than maybe what I write now. The kids are like 19, like, okay, whatever. But it does make a big difference. So you write this short story, which eventually becomes a book. But as you're writing this short story, as you're taking this creative writing class and you're producing, are you thinking about doing anything with it? Like if you have a short story, you're thinking about shopping it, or you're just like, oh, that was a fun thing to do?
No, I wanted to do something with it. I ended up shopping it to, like, I thought maybe I could write it in serial and put it out in a magazine or something, because I knew nothing about the industry. Right. I knew nothing about the industry. And, I played with it. I mean, when I say I set it in a drawer, I mean, I pulled it out once or twice and started writing stuff out longhand a couple times, but it really sat in a drawer. I had copies of all the notes because it was a workshop that I was in, basically, at Indiana University. And so I had all the, like 25 copies of that short story with all the notes from everybody. And I was just, it was one of those things I was going to get to eventually. And, life just got in the way, and it never I just didn't know what to do with it. And, it was a great feeling. I sat down and I said, you know what, instead of reading a book, I'm going to work on a book. And if I'm going to write 3 chapters, because I wanted to write it from 3 different points of view. And then I'm going to, keep going if I enjoy that process. And then I ended up going to a writer's conference once I had a draft, and that changed everything because I learned about how to break into the industry. But I really did, once I really got going, I wanted to do something with it. And, it was probably the closest thing to an overnight success that one could hope for. I mean, an overnight success in writing takes 10 years. But it was...
Right, and it means actually selling a book.
Yeah. Exactly. And, I sold it for a very meager advance to a nice, Kensington is a nice size house.
Yep.
And, it went nowhere because Canadian Colonial was a hard sell. But then I switched over to World War II, which was the big thing, and had an interesting topic about the women fighter pilots that were fighting for the Soviet Army. And I took it to Lake Union, which is a completely different ball of wax, over at Amazon Publishing. But the cool thing was Kensington did a book bub for my first book, and it sold like 4,000 copies in a day.
Right.
So
So you hit the bestsellers list, and that becomes...
Yeah, if it had been earlier in the week, I would have been USA Today for Promise to the Crown. But, it's fine though, because the great thing is I can say that all of my books have financially been at least modestly successful. They've all earned out. Right. Which is just a great feeling to know that no, I'm not on the New York Times yet, but it's a moderate success, and that's a good feeling, and it feels like it's increasing with each book.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're being a little modest. I would say moderate success is underselling yourself a little bit, and I know you've been like me, you've been through a few different publishers, and there's, like you said, there's a vast difference between a lot of them, and Amazon. Certainly, I've talked to a lot of people with Lake Union and the other imprints, and that's so you go to Amazon, you look at your books that sold through Lake Union. There's like 20,000 reviews because Amazon has that footprint to be able to say, look at this on the
they pull the lever.
It's amazing.
They pull the lever.
Yeah, it's amazing. So as you're starting your writing journey and you're actually having this 10-year overnight success, and you're starting to commit into the kind of the World War II era, what is your growth as a writer in terms of research and committing to historical accuracy, and what is your belief system about how true you want to be to historical events and historical people through, and balancing that with the story?
I think that in the most part, I can't make up anything better than what actually happened. So right. I try to respect history. I mean, will I play with a timeline to make the narrative work? Absolutely. And that's what the author's notes for. Like I decided to combine these 2 battles for the sake of the narrative. And nobody has a problem with that as a reader. Even the most diehard, because with the World War II, the biggest, when I was writing 1669 Canada, nobody knows who reads it hardly. I mean, it's like the thing that you get nailed on there is, oh gosh, they had, I said they had a silver-plated hairbrush and it should have been wooden or ivory or what have you. Right. Those are the details that people get up in arms about. But there are armchair historians for World War II that know every battle bullet by bullet. This is their hobby. So you try to respect it. And then if you need to move things around for the sake of the narrative, you just, write a mea culpa in the author's note. And so with the exception of playing with the timeline, I try to keep things as accurate as I can. And it's so easy to fall down rabbit holes. If I'm worried about some minor detail about a uniform, I will, literally turn on a timer. And if I can't find it within half an hour, and sometimes I'll ask for outside help. If it's a minute detail, I will eventually just have to make something up, because it's not, it's not worth that amount of heartache. Right. If you just can't find the answer. Or writing over it. Sometimes you're just leaving the detail out altogether. Right. It's fine. It's fine. And so one thing I've done to get away, because there are different levels of historical fiction. One of the most detail would be like biographical fiction. If you're writing a biography, and this is what I'm working on now about Claire Eiffel, the daughter of the man who built the Eiffel Tower, Gustave Eiffel. If I can find a fact, I will make it up. Now, there is not a lot of known about her, but there is a lot known about her father. And so every time he's on stage, so to speak, I make sure that I know where he was. I make sure that, it's all at least plausible. And if there is something known, I'm not going to alter it if I can. And that's like the highest level of detail. With a lot of my other books, I've created fictional characters, like for Girls on the Line, which is actually not up here because I'm actually writing another story about the Hello Girls from World War I. So that's missing. And I was looking up something in my own book. But so I took there were a few cameos from like General Pershing, but for the most part, I took made up women, but they're basically composite characters, like Grace Baker, who was the first chief operator in World War I for the Signal Corps, the American women who worked as telephone operators. And I had diaries from a few women and kind of just took details and created composite characters. So that way I can take bits and pieces of things that actually happened and put them all in one, in one story. And that was, it's a lot of fun to do that because it gives you some leeway. But if you're dealing with actual people, that's when, it's like when General Pershing made a visit, I made sure that he was likely to have made a visit to these women where they were. And
because you want to respect the readers, and I get that, and there is that balance between knowing what you can plausibly get away with, and my kind of rule is like if you can fool 70% of the people, then
good enough.
That's kind of good enough. But there are also people. So think of like Jim Cameron with making the Titanic. He had the dinner where the flatware was true to exactly how it was, even though you never see it, and it just all goes down the ship. To him, that was important to have that. I think there's some writers who are like that, who just like, it doesn't matter what the readers think. This is important to me but that's a painstaking process. And to your point, a lot of times you can't find that information.
And
how does it work when you're saying if you can't find something within a half an hour, say you find it, you're not a journalist. You're not getting multiple sources for everything you do. How are you comfortable that what you're finding online, presumably, is correct?
Well, there's bias in everything. And if I find one source, that's exactly it. Now, my husband is a historian. He's a professor at the University of Arizona. And so I highly recommend for all historical fiction authors out there to have an in-house historian. Extremely helpful. But, my burden of proof is far different from his. Because I am writing, if I'm writing the perspective of a woman going to the German bride schools, for example, it's one perspective and she's allowed her biases and I can put that into my fiction. If one woman says that the food was, lavishly prepared, and another woman says, it was terrible, for example, I'm at liberty to choose what I please and to depict it how I feel it serves a story. Whereas if my husband were writing an account of something similar, he would have to include all of that. And one source, if he can only find one source, it has to be, basically a huge asterisk there saying, this is just one person's opinion. And you cannot base, a historical account on one opinion without taking it with a massive grain of salt. And a bakery in Paris was actually my husband, then boyfriend, now husband. He suggested, because I was idea hunting, it's like, you should look into the Paris Commune. And, of course, there's a lot written about the Paris Commune, which is the uprising after the siege of Paris by the Germans, rather. They pushed them out and, they finally lost the battle. And afterwards, the people of Paris raised up and they kicked out the government. They wanted to govern themselves and have a Paris of the people. And there are tons of accounts of what happened. And there are certain things that are corroborated, like the women defending the cannons up on the hill in Montmartre. And that is a major scene in the book that you've got tons of perspectives on. And, for me, it was really important. There are, numerous wonderful books that have one-on-one accounts of what it was like living in Paris while it was locked down.
Yeah.
And I was writing it, just as we were emerging from stay-at-home orders and all that stuff. So there was a perspective there I could put on there as an author. But, for me, if I can find multiple sources and multiple firsthand accounts from both sides, because there's always, multiple, sides to a story, the side that were, what's the word, sympathetic with the communard, the people who wanted people of the Paris of the people, versus the Versailles, which were the people that liked the established order. To know how they saw the events unfolding was important to know, even though, of course, my main character is very sympathetic with the commune. And it was a great joy to write that book.
So when you're looking at something like that, like let's take A Bakery in Paris, for example, and you're kind of focused initially on the events of this is what it was like in Paris during this time, and this is an interesting subject matter, then are you kind of looking at like, okay, now I'm going to create a fictional character through whom this story will be told. And then you have all that power to say, I can make this person whoever I want. But the events are true to history.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I do. And so basically I always start with the what, which is the historical event, the context. And for A Bakery in Paris, it's the Paris Commune and the reconstruction of Paris after World War II. So it's not a World War II book, it's a post-war book. For those of you experiencing World War II burnout, I feel you. And so you have those two time periods. And so that's the what, because a story is, you've got the plot, you have the character. The story is something happening to someone, right?
Yeah, right.
So the plot is a something, the character is a someone, the story is something happening to someone. So as I'm reading, I almost always start off with a great, like usually a secondary source, like for this one, or A Bakery in Paris, the Paris Commune half. It was really based on, I started reading Massacre by John Merriman, which is an amazing book that my husband recommended. I read it aloud to him on a road trip. Wonderful. And so, looking over, the accounts from both sides and the events and what happened, the characters start formulating out of those pages. The same thing happened with Girls on the Line, where I'm reading this book about, somebody said, write a book about the Hello Girls. I said, that's a grand idea. I start reading the Hello Girls by Elizabeth Cobbs, which is a brilliant book. And Ruby, that character, just leapt off the pages as I'm reading. And so, taking a girl who was born to a very comfortable birth in a bakery in Paris, and having her become sympathetic with the commune was the journey I wanted to take.
Interesting.
with that character. Yeah.
And is it important that you go to Paris and have a sense of the environment? The time period's obviously totally different, but is that, or are you able to just be at Estes Park and transport yourself mentally?
Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time because I couldn't go to Paris because most of this book was written before air travel was really possible. And so I spent a lot of time on Google Maps. I found a specific bakery, and I was just hang out on that street in the Place du Texte in Montmartre and look at the building and walk around. And it helped. It helped immensely, more than I ever thought it would. But I got to go to Paris. I've been to Paris twice since I finished this book, actually. And the first time I was, I still had time to make some changes, and I was able to include a few things. But there wasn't like a great, Paris Commune museum to visit or anything that, like for Mademoiselle Eiffel, my work in progress. I got to go to the Musée d'Orsay, and I spent a week in the archives, poring over her dad's papers. And it was amazing, absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
But for A Bakery in Paris, I specifically chose a book where I could use a lot of secondary source material, and there's plenty of stuff available that I was able to buy, used old books online and find sources online. Whereas with Mademoiselle Eiffel, I felt like I really had to do archival work. And so, but now that we're able to go, I was able to go, to do that archival work. But I visited all the places from A Bakery in Paris, before it was, just, as the 11th hour before it was like, out of my hands, and was able to include some descriptive stuff for my trip. Lots of pictures that you guys will see online from all the places that exist in the book. And I took, lots of, I went around this last time because I was just there in March, taking my advanced review copy and snapping pictures all over, like in front of the bakery. And the sad thing was, I visited the bakery that I'd been staring at online for a year, and I didn't realize it. I checked the opening times a million times online. It closed permanently 4 weeks before.
Oh my goodness!
And it's like all boarded up now.
You couldn't even see through the windows. Oh,
yeah, you couldn't even peek through the windows, and it was it got posters from like various concerts all over the front of it. And, the top floor is an Airbnb. And, it was so sad. I wish I could, if there had been like, a for sale number, I probably would have called the real estate person and asked if I could please just take a peek inside and explain, given them a free copy of the book and explain to them what I was doing. But there was no number, nothing. It's very.
I thought you were going to say you would have bought it.
No, sadly, I'm not. Okay, my books are doing well, but not quite that well to buy real estate in a hot area of Paris. Because the area where this takes place, it's a bustling, tight, you think of Paris has got those nice wide streets because of the prefect Haussmann that turned Paris from a medieval city into a modern city in the 1900s or 1800s. He really, he widened the streets. Montmartre is still these little serpentine streets.
Yeah.
And the area where this bakery was, and there are not a lot of bakeries in Montmartre. And that's an important thing in the theme because it was very working class, and it takes a lot to support a business. And it's in the Place du Tetre, though, which is like this hot little tourist hub now. And they've got like really chic cafes. You've got artists in the square. It's right near Sacré-Cœur, which is kind of the villain of the book. That basilica is a villain in the book. You'll find in the very final chapters. So because it was basically built as a thumb to the nose to the people of Paris after the uprising, and the might of the elite over the common people.
Oh, that's interesting.
But so like there's a church that features prominently in the book, and it's one of the oldest churches in Paris, and it's still standing. And it's like right next door to Sacré-Cœur Basilica. And they're kind of like antithetical churches. And I love that.
So, and then with all of that you're doing, where you're really going deep into the history and the facts around that time period, I think the other thing that's fascinating is you still have to balance all of that. Because as you know, when you're reading a book that somebody has perhaps over-researched, and you get a sense of like, okay, they're just showing off their research, but I'm not empathizing with the character. I'm not interested. It just feels like I'm reading a textbook. And I assume that that's a hard thing to keep perspective on the deeper and deeper you get into the book. So at what point are you just totally like relying on your husband as a first reader, as a historian, on your editor, even on the copy editor to say like, okay, I'm getting pulled out of this because there's too much information?
I guess that's not something, because I am a pretty spare writer. My first drafts come in like 5,000 to 10,000 words under the final draft.
Oh, interesting.
And I always I depend on my characters to keep me in line.
Yeah.
And it's always story first, history second, because I'm going to leave the writing of wonderfully detailed, researched, nonfiction historical books to my husband. That's his job. And and it's amazing the difference in the process. But I get so immersed in my own stories and my own characters that I guess I have a decent enough sense of this is getting boring to stop. And I'm in the midst of writing a novella now, and let me tell you that novellas are tough because you've got a third of the space, 1/3 of the amount of words to convey a satisfying arc. And I'll start writing, and it's like, oh, I've got to cut 800 of these words because I started too soon. I can get away with that in a novel, like setting the scene. Nope, got to jump right into it. So I think it's a great exercise for me as an author to write these novellas because I learned to cut the nonsense and really focus on, where the action starts. So it's just one of those things where you rely on story first. The history has to serve the story rather than the story serving the history.
And you still have to determine, regardless of what you're writing, what that story is. And, if the story is about action, that's fine. But if it's about, a character's journey from getting from point A to point B,
Mm-hmm.
What are the emotions involved with that? And it's interesting that kind of like ties into your short story where your feedback was, this is great, but it feels like the first chapter of a novel. I'm the same way. It's very difficult for me to write short fiction because I end up kind of saying, okay, here's a moment of this person's life in 3,000 words. But maybe not much actually happens because I need those 90,000 words to breathe because that's what I know. And it's like you said, it's very hard to cut it down. But once you go into that and you start cutting it down, then you realize like how superfluous some of your writing actually is. I do that sometimes with readings. I'm trying to choose something to read and I kind of just rewrite it for time. And I'm like, why did I just write it like this to begin with? This is so much better and tighter.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that people who read novels, bless their hearts, we love you. They want to swim in it. They want to swim in the story. So of course, yes. I mean, there's always such an emphasis on being taught and being deliberate with your words. But sometimes we've got to give we've got to give the characters time to develop.
Yeah.
And yes, every scene has to move things forward, but not every scene in every book, depending on the book. I mean, if you're writing a fast-paced thriller action, every scene's got to burn down the door more or less. But even then, don't we have to have scenes where the reader gets to breathe?
100%. Yeah, totally. Because, and it's not even just about breathing, although that's definitely some of it. But if it's just action, it's boring. And you're not giving the reader a chance to like care about what happens during that action. What are the stakes for that character? And if I don't care about that character, then all the action in the world just becomes mind-numbing. You're like, I don't really care if this person lives or dies. So it is really about, when people ask what's more important, like character or plot development, I put emotion first, then character, and then plot development.
Absolutely.
Because I think they're all dependent on one another. But it's, you lose perspective over the course of writing a book because you're so immersed in it. That's why you need that feedback because of that. So when you're again, let's go back to Bakery in Paris because I know it's your upcoming novel. When you're setting forth and like, I really want to write about this, do you have a contract at that point with your publisher? Do you have something you're pitching to them? Or you're like, this is what I'm going to write. I've got a good track record. I'm not worried about it selling, but I'm not asking permission to write this book.
Oh, okay. So I have such a great relationship with my editors that it is a bit of a conversation because I want to stay with them.
Right.
I do have some ideas in my pocket that eventually, like, if they really don't want them, I may take them elsewhere. But, for a Bakery in Paris and, because I had my first book with William Morrow was The School for German Brides. And because we pitched another book because Lake Union said, oh, your sales were amazing, but not quite amazing enough for us. I've
been there.
14,000 reviews, not quite enough.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. But, it's a business and that's fine. And so I had another book in mind and I was going to pitch a Bakery in Paris to Lake Union. And they said, we're really sorry. We just can't. Fine. But we pitched a Gilded Age novel to William Morrow. And they said, Aimie, we love your writing. And I'd met my editor, Tessa, at Historical Novel Society back in 2019. And she picked up a copy of Girls on the Line. She's like, if you ever need another home, call me. And so that was really exciting. And so she was on the top of my list of editors and we pitched them a Gilded Age novel. And they said, we just don't feel like the Downton Abbey kind of stuff is selling right now. What else you got? And I pitched them the German Bride School and they said, can we see a synopsis tomorrow? And yes, you can. Bang, bam, bam. Got it out. And so we came and then they asked for a couple chapters. And then with a Bakery in Paris, I already had that proposal ready to go for Lake Union before I hadn't even had a chance to send it off to them. And we said, as soon as the German Brides got accepted, we said, what do you think of this? because it was already prepared. It was like a 5-page synopsis, 7 pages, and 3 sample chapters. And they said, yes, absolutely. And
That's awesome.
then for Mademoiselle Eiffel, which is my 24 book, basically it was just we gave them 2 ideas, one of which we already had the synopsis and some chapters. The other one was Mademoiselle Eiffel. It was like a 4-page synopsis. And they said, we're going with that one. With Mademoiselle Eiffel, we want to break you into some biographical fiction and see how that goes. And so it was, we give them options before you really get invested in a project.
Got it.
Though sometimes it's hard, even getting the fall in love with those, the synopsis and the sample chapters. Right. But I'm so grateful to be at a part in my career where, for my historical fiction, I can sell it on a proposal and a couple of chapters. And I'm also working on some contemporary women's fiction with Harper Muse, which is another imprint of HarperCollins and William Morrow. And, we're dealing with, I sell a book to them based on a proposal. And
that's
it's
great.
Wonderful.
It's great. Awesome. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up, but before we do, we're going to do quick storytelling. Speaking of writing. So I've picked 3 books from my bookshelves, kind of at random, and you're going to choose one of them, and we're going to pick a random sentence from a random page, and I'm going to read that sentence. And then that's the first sentence of maybe a 2-minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence. You give me a couple sentences. I'll do a couple sentences, and then when it turns into a complete shit show, I'll call it a day.
Sounds great.
So out of respect, Cormac McCarthy passed away yesterday.
Oh.
All the Pretty Horses. And I have The Rule of 4, Ian Caldwell and Dustin Thomason. Mm-hmm. And Forsyth's The Negotiator. So pick one of those.
Oh, let's go with Cormac McCarthy. I know this is swinging for the fences, but
it really is.
Respect.
All right. Yeah. Give me a page between 1 and 300.
Let's do 174.
Okay. I'll choose a sentence with words. He's such an amazing writer, but then there are words you're like, that can't be a real word. Then you look it up, you're like, oh my God, that's a real word from like 1755. All right. All right. I'm going to go very, very basic. They looked at him. They looked at each other.
Okay. So they looked at him. They looked at each other. They decided that there was a moment of hesitation as they decided how to proceed forward. Were they was the heist worth the risk? This is hard riffing like this. Was the heist worth the risk, or would they, would they be better to pack it all up and go home, thinking that the entire endeavor would be a misadventure they could laugh about later? I didn't do this out.
There was nothing to laugh about at the moment, because all 4 of them each had a gun drawn on somebody else's head. It was stupid, Brian thought. I've seen this 100 times in the movies, where everyone has everything to lose all at once, and what usually happens is everyone dies. He released the safety on his pistol and decided this might be the day.
It would have been so easy for them to holster their guns, but the problem was that somebody would have to act first, and the person who asked first would risking everything. That person would have to put their life on the line to end the hostility, to end the tension. But in so doing, they left themselves vulnerable to the other 3 guns that would so easily be directed right at his head.
So Brian did something that surprised himself. He went, in a matter of seconds, deep inside his head, focusing on his breathing, all those stupid meditation techniques Sylvia had taught him over the years. He was going to use it right now. And as he exhaled to a count of 8, he focused intently on the gun pointed at his own head and on the man holding it. And he didn't look it into his eyes. Rather, he focused the 2 inches right above them on his forehead. And there he saw that single bead of sweat dripping down.
And wasn't it true? They were all just as afraid as he was. They were all thinking the same thing. Maybe they all, each in their turn, wanted to holster their guns and go home. But everything would be, all could be lost in a matter of seconds. They had to be brave enough to be cowards and holster their guns.
Oh, we're going to end it there because I love the phrase "brave enough to be cowards."
There we go.
That's a book title right there.
Brave Enough to Be Cowards, coming soon by Cormac Wilson and Aimie Runyan.
That's a Western right there, right?
Yeah, I can see the tumbleweeds.
Yeah, totally. And there's no people on the cover. It's just a vast New Mexico landscape with the tumbleweed going across.
Oh, perfect. I love it.
Well, listen, Aimie, congratulations not only on all the success that you've had, but on your upcoming release. I believe it's August, correct?
August 1st.
Yeah, that's coming soon. Well, congratulations, and what a good time talking to you.
Oh, thank you, Carter, and I just enjoyed this so very much.
We'll see you around Colorado.
Okay, take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
My conversation with Aimie Runyan. So I love that conversation, and I really enjoyed actually the little story that we came up with that was based on a Cormac McCarthy novel, and of course Cormac McCarthy. As I'm recording this, just passed away yesterday, unfortunately, at the ripe old age of 89. But I thought where we went with that story, kind of honored him. It had kind of that Western kind of a feel to it for sure. But Aimie was great, and I encourage you to find out all about her. You can just go to her website, which is aimierunyan.com. And if you want to find out more about me, if you want to sign up for my writing retreat this August in Boulder, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, buy my books, or check my appearances, please just head on over to my website at carterwilson.com. So that's it. That's it for now. More episodes of Making It Up coming out very soon. In the meantime, as always, thank you very much for watching and or listening. Take care.